If you go to the American state of Iowa, you will find a city called El Khadr, a simplified abbreviation for Abdelkader. The city was named by Timothy Davis, after the brave Algerian Prince Abdelkader, the Algerian warrior who resisted French colonialism and defended his homeland against the colonizers. His story was not a local legend, but a global one, published in every newspaper in the world at the time. The stories of Amir Abdelkader captivated Americans as they sought independence from Britain, and their courage as weak individuals in the face of a superpower. President Abraham Lincoln, when honoring Amir Abdelkader in 1860, described him, as a great Muslim and humanitarian. The question here is, who was Abdelkader? In May 1807, Abdelkader Nasreddin was born in the village of El Khadna, south of Oran. He was the son of Sheikh Muhyiddin ben Mustafa, the leader of the Qadiriya Sufi order, widely respected throughout Algeria. From a young age, Abdelkader was intelligent, evident in his brilliance as he learned the Quran and religion, as well as philosophy, mathematics, and history. In 1826, at the age of 19, he traveled with his father on a months-long Hajj pilgrimage. During this trip, he visited Arab capitals such as Tunis, where he witnessed the developments of the governor, Ahmed Bey, and Cairo, where he witnessed the developments of Muhammad Ali, who would personally warn him against the British and French who sought to colonize the Arab region, especially Algeria. This trip helped the young Abdelkader see the diverse world around him, become more eager to learn, and, most importantly, learn more about the history of the Arab region. The story begins with a trivial incident that would change the history of Algeria forever. Dey Hussein, the Ottoman governor of Algiers, slapped the French consul in the face 3 times after a verbal altercation. This served as a pretext for the French fleet to move toward Algiers. Indeed, on May 25, 1830, the French fleet appeared off the Algerian coast, with 100 warships and 40,000 soldiers. At first, the Ottoman army attempted to repel the attack repeatedly, but failed. On July 5, the resistance was crushed, and Dey Hussein signed the surrender treaty. He was exiled and deported to Alexandria. At first, the people of Algiers believed that the problem was solely with Dey Hussein, and that the French presence in the capital was temporary. However, the truth was that the French had greater ambitions, to occupy all of Algiers. The French army began to expand, capturing Annaba and Oran, and the Ottoman rulers began to flee Algeria. By the end of 1832, Algeria became in complete chaos. Entire villages were destroyed, and people fled, seeking refuge. Those who weren't afraid of the occupier were afraid of bandits. Suddenly, the people of Oran, in western Algeria, found themselves without a leader. There is no leader to rule us. They turned to Sheikh Muhyiddin bin Mustafa, the father of Abd al-Qadir, whom we are talking about. He had already led the people of Algeria in skirmishes that had halted the French advance south. However, Sheikh Muhyiddin refused to assume leadership. When they found him refusing, they went to the Sultan of Morocco, sending him a message asking him to come and rule Algeria. Initially, he agrees and sends his son, but immediately receives French threats: "Go back to your place, or we will declare war on Morocco." Here, the Moroccan Sultan is forced to withdraw, leaving Algeria without a leader. Despite the French army's slogans that it came to spread civilization and educate uncivilized peoples, the opposite happened. The French army dealt with the people of Algeria with extreme cruelty. The commander of the French army, Pierre Bouillet, nicknamed Boyer the Cruel, clearly and explicitly states, "Sometimes, in order to spread civilization, we must resort to uncivilized actions." Once again, the Algerian tribes went to Sheikh Muhyiddin and begged him to assume leadership. He refused. But he told them, "I see my son, Abdelkader, as the leader of the future." This surprising solution was widely welcomed by the tribes of western Algeria, who had witnessed Abdelkader's courage in the skirmishes with the French, and his ability to lead soldiers and achieve his goals. At that moment, everyone agreed that Abdelkader would become the new emir and sultan of the Arabs in Algeria. From the village of El Tinna to his headquarters in the city of Mascara, the streets welcomed him with great joy. The next day, 10,000 fighters arrived from the tribes surrounding Oran to pledge allegiance to him. The young man, who was only 25 years old, became a leader overnight, solely responsible for reclaiming Algeria from France. However, some tribes, especially those in the large cities, naturally refused to have him as their leader. "He's a young boy from a village," they commented sarcastically. Some even sent troops to fight him, but Abdelkader had far-sighted ambitions. He said, "I won't just resist the French, I'll rebuild this shattered state." Abdelkader's first decision wasn't to fight the French. He decided to fight anyone who collaborated with France first. As he was always concerned with keeping the French occupation isolated, unable to extend its roots inland. After all, it was an occupying entity that didn't know the land or the region, and needed people from within to cooperate with. If we got rid of the people inside who were cooperating with it, he would remain trapped in the coastal cities. Indeed, many tribes pledged allegiance to Abdelkader, thus extending his authority over the entire southern part of Oran. But the difficult thing about Abdelkader's experience was that he wanted to gather people from the desert, whose fighting abilities were primitive, whose goals and ambitions were very different from each other. They had never submitted to any authority other than that of the tribe. How did this man do that? This man didn't just unite them, he created a real state with them, like the one he saw in Tunisia and Muhammad Ali's experience in Egypt, the experience that basically began with building a professional army. And here, Abdelkader decided that he would not confront the French army with volunteers, young men who would gather during the battle and go home when the fight was over. For this reason, he began to establish an independent, professional army, whose loyalty would not be to a specific tribe, but rather to Algeria, an army with a modern, organized form, official uniforms, a chain of command, military laws, and salaries. The army's forces began to grow, and Abdelkader's attacks increased. His attacks became stronger over time and caused France more losses. In October 1833, under the leadership of General Demichel, the French began their first actions against Emir Abdelkader, punishing some tribes south of Oran who had cooperated with him. However, Abdelkader had early reconnaissance units that enabled him to prepare a well-planned ambush for General Demichel's forces. He would destroy a force of 3,000 French soldiers and also take them captive. Here, the French would learn that a new force had emerged, more dangerous than the Ottoman governors. A force that not only fights them, but also triumphs over them and takes them captive. This wasn't the only surprise, as Abdelkader's army astutely noticed that the supplies of food, drink, and ammunition arriving by sea for the French army were very scarce these days. This was due to the political unrest in France. He then decided to boycott trade with the French completely. This strategy was initiated by the necessity of punishing any Algerian who collaborated with the occupier. He announced this decision to the people of Algeria. Here, the French in Algeria were surprised. The tribes, which they had thought were weak and fragmented, were not only defeated them, but also caused them famine. Faced with this reality, the commander of the French forces in Oran, General Demichel, offered Abd el-Kader a truce. He requested it from him more than once, but Abd el-Kader ignored him more than once, as he was now in a stronger position. When Abd el-Kader finally agreed, the Demichel Treaty was expected, in which the general recognized Emir Abd el-Kader's authority over southern Oran. But Abd el-Kader knew full well that this was a trick and that the French were treacherous. Abd el-Kader began organizing his state in the image of a modern state, which he had certainly seen during his Hajj pilgrimage. The agencies submitted weekly reports to higher authorities, detailed budgets, and a census of the soldiers' salaries, who devoted their lives to the military. They had regular training throughout the week. At one point, they numbered 60,000 soldiers. Not only that, he began to enlist foreign experts to build gunpowder and weapons factories for him. These factories would produce more than 20 cannons, extending his influence beyond the borders of Oran. Here, several cities began to write to him, seeking to join him. Furthermore, Abd el-Kader placed great importance on education as one of the most important factors in the rise of the state. He even sent representatives to Anatolia to make simplified versions of Ibn Arabi's books, making them easily readable by the public. He also imposed penalties on anyone who desecrated or cut up a book. When General Trezel succeeded Demichel, he realized that the issue was no longer just rebellious tribes. "We are facing almost an entire state bent on modern systems," he declared. "We must nip this state in the bud, before it grows too large and we don't know how to deal with it." At this point, Trezel cancelled the Demichel Treaty. In June 1835, a campaign of thousands of soldiers armed with cannons set out to annihilate Abd el-Kader's state. At the Makta area, the two armies met. The French army was surprised to find that Abdel-Kader and his army were employing radically new war tactics that shocked them and rendered their cannons worthless. Many French were wounded, most notably General Trezel himself, who lost an eye in this battle. The French force was completely destroyed. The remaining French forces withdrew in a humiliating manner, leaving Emir Abd el-Kader victorious. Algerians commemorate and immortalize his memory to this day. When news of this humiliating defeat reached France, politicians there were shocked. Questions were raised in the French parliament asking how a young man in his 20s, leading primitive tribes, could defeat the French army in such a humiliating defeat. When they summoned the French commanders from Algeria to hear their statements, they found the commanders complaining of weak forces and scarce supplies. "The soldiers are standing hungry in battle," indeed, the French leadership responded, replenishing the forces, and appointing a new commander, General Clausel, who moved his army toward Abdel-Kader. When he arrived in the capital on December 6, 1835, he found the city empty. At that point, Emir Abdel-Kader preferred to withdraw, and so the French army burned his city. Convinced that they had thus limited his power, they defeated him. But they forgot his other weapon, which was neither rifles nor combat. The policy of starvation was one of Emir Abdel-Kader's favorite policies. He cut off all food supply lines to the French once again and created rapid intervention forces whose mission was to attack food stores. In cities under French control, the forces struck, destroyed the food, and fled into the forests or deserts. Here, the French were forced to send a message to Emir Abdel-Kader. Indeed, a new peace treaty was signed on May 31, 1837, known as the Treaty of Tafna. This treaty not only recognized the emir's authority, but also defined a clear area for his state. Its borders included 2/3 of Algeria and limited French presence to the coast. Abdel-Kader exploited this treaty to begin modernizing his state. He divided it into 8 provinces. Here, Abdel-Kader exercised his authority as the leader of the state, establishing diplomatic relations with England, America, and other countries. He also chose the city of Taqadoumt as a permanent capital for the new state. This city's historical roots date back to the Roman era. Abdel-Kader supported it with forts and houses, and built streets, alleys, and government offices. He also exploited the Roman catacombs and turned them into ammunition stores. He established a rifle factory that produced 8 rifles per day, and another factory for cannons. Surprisingly, he brought in workers and experts from France itself. The prince sent delegates to Europe to search for experts in the arms industry, and made them tempting offers of cooperation. Indeed, experts from Spain and France responded. He also sent exploratory missions to the mountains of Algeria to discover new mines. He succeeded in extracting lead, iron, and sulfur from these mines. In addition, he created something resembling a Ministry of Economy, whose mission was to manage the country's crop resources and store them properly. The group that ran this economy came up with a brilliant idea. A plan to divide your resources into parts, even if parts were lost. The rest are there. Thus, every city and village now has a complete food storehouse. If someone decides to cut off supplies to one area, other cities can supply them. And if a city is besieged, they won't have a problem with food or supplies. Anyway, supplies don't come from just one place, because there are secret food stores everywhere in Algeria. However, this prosperous state, created by Emir Abdel-Kader, was on a date with French policy, which would bring about change, upsetting all the balance. Voices emerged from France, attacking Emir Abdel-Kader and the treaty signed with him. The French felt that France had made too many concessions. was upset that it had left all of Oran and a large part of western Algeria to Abdelkader. They felt they should have more space in the east. Here, the French began to think and expand their influence in eastern Algeria. Of course, Abdelkader, as a seasoned politician, was aware that the French certainly wanted to cancel the treaty. Here, he began to correspond with French leaders to maintain peace. In his letter to Philippe Louis, King of France, he said, "You came to the coasts of Africa not to turn the people into a nation of slaves, but to instill among them the spirit of freedom that has become the motto of your nation. Will you achieve this goal by force of arms or by breaking treaties?" France's desire for expansion was greater than Abd el-Kader's desire for peace. They began mobilizing their military forces in a clear violation of the treaty and a direct insult to Abd el-Kader. It was as if they were telling him, "You did not earn this peace through your struggle and your fighting. It was merely a favor from us to you." At that moment, Abdelkader affirmed his insistence and commitment to keeping the borders of his state as they were. On November 18, 1839, he convened a war council and declared war on France. France responded by revoking any recognition of Emir Abdelkader's state and declaring that all of Algeria was French territory forever. In April 1840, a massive French army, consisting of 30,000 fighters, left Algiers and headed for the city of Midia. Abdelkader's army, in a tactical error, attempted to confront this army, but discovered that it was not yet ready. It was unable to confront the tactics of such a modern army. They are facing a modern army of a modern colonial state. Here, Abdelkader withdraws from the city, and the French continue to expand, storming Algerian cities one after another, until they storm the emir's capital and destroy its forts. You might think this was the end of it. The big cities were falling into the hands of the French, and the capital itself was falling and finished. But the truth is, Emir Abdelkader devised a strange and new technique. You're looking for cities to destroy. We're going to create a city and make it a mobile capital. A moving target is much more difficult than a fixed one. This is where fellowship comes in. Fellowship is simply a group of settlements that move around Algeria depending on the circumstances of the war. If we're attacked, we move away and go to the desert, or hide in the mountains and forests. Things are stable and security is assured. We approach the cities. We move exactly like an army. This is a very innovative idea. It's not just a bunch of tents being taken down and set up. No, this is a city with a population of up to 20,000 people, carrying all the state's assets. A mobile city. Gold, money, herds of cattle, and sheep. When the capital is moving, it moved in a precise order. Each tent knew its exact location, it had a number, and each number knew exactly where it was. In the middle were streets, roads, markets, schools, and government offices. The capital had a police force and a regulatory body, all of which were mobile. The army itself, however, was not in the community, but rather close to it to protect it. This approach, of course, succeeded in exhausting the French in a terrifying manner. Emir Abdelkader's forces were so light they were not directly confronted. They attacked the rear of the French forces, in the literary, literal, and military senses, striking the flanks of the armies at various times, waging a long and exhausting war of attrition against them, capturing thousands of them as prisoners. Let me tell you that Emir Abdelkader had established a special system for captives, a national decree to treat them with dignity. Some historians consider this a dazzling model and far ahead of its time. The decree stipulated that every Arab who had a French captive with him was responsible for his proper treatment. If the captive complained of any kind of mistreatment, the Arab captor would be subject to punishment. There was no such thing as a personal captive or a forced laborer. You received a reward for capturing a captive and handing them over to the specialized authorities, who were responsible for organizing their affairs. If the captives were women, they were sent to Zamali, fellowship, to be under the personal care of Abdelkader's mother, who personally took care of their protection. This guerrilla warfare tactic was extremely exhausting for the French. For example, one of the French camps in Algeria, the Miliana camp, was nearly destroyed under pressure from Abd el-Kader. In his book, The Life of the Emir, Abd el-Kader, the British diplomat Charles Henry Churchill writes that Abd el-Kader's plan for blitzkrieg and the use of starvation was so successful that if we look at a single French camp, half of the 1,500 soldiers in the camp died in the attacks, 500 were wounded, and 250 were reduced to walking skeletons, unable to carry weapons because their bodies were weakened by starvation. But just as the emir developed his tactics, the French also developed theirs. When they discovered secret food stores in cities, they began to rely on stealing them. Suddenly, they no longer had to carry food and water supplies. Because they know that if they go anywhere, no matter how small, there's bound to be a storehouse with food and drink, so will be light. And just as decentralization was good for these cities, it's now become their weak point. Then came Abd el-Kader's most powerful blow, when, by pure chance, the French found the mobile capital, El-Zamala. Duke Doman, son of the King of France, after seeing the capital by chance, decided to attack it, even though he wasn't prepared and didn't have enough troops. He was lucky, because at the time, Abd el-Kader and his army weren't stationed near El-Zamala. Indeed, the attack succeeded, and the French were able to seize all of Abd el-Kader's resources, gold, money, and livestock. They also took the most prominent families of Abd el-Kader as prisoners, more than 3,000 of them. This attack was immortalized by the French painter Horace Vernet in his painting, The Fall of El-Zamala, which, as you can see, is a painting dominated by chaos and fear, depicted on the faces of all the inhabitants of El-Zamala, including the terror of civilians. At that point, Emir Abd el-Kader preferred to withdraw all his troops to Morocco until he could reorganize his ranks. Of course, he had a good relationship with the Sultan of Morocco, Abdulrahman II. But as you know, France wouldn't be silent. It was only a step away from Abd el-Kader's life. At that point, the French army declared war on Morocco. The two armies clashed on August 14, 1844. At the same time, French ships launched attacks from the sea on coastal cities. When the Moroccan army lost, the Moroccan Sultan, Abd al-Rahman, was forced to sign the Treaty of Tangier, which clearly stipulated that the Sultan of Morocco would not only refrain from assisting Abd el-Kader, but would also be obliged to surrender him if he ever got his hands on him. You might think this is the end, but in fact, it's just before the end. So what's the end? The man has no allies, no capital, no state, and no money. Let me tell you that Emir Abd el-Kader is determined to resist, and continues with the soldiers he has left, waging amazing battles. Just like he captured 600 French prisoners without a single bullet in the Ain Tamauchent region. When this happens, France sends one of its most powerful generals. General Bouguereau, with an army of 120,000 soldiers. Their goal is one thing, to eliminate Abd el-Kader once and for all. We don't want this man. For 2 years, the pursuits and skirmishes between Abd el-Kader and the French army continue. Of course, let's agree that Abd el-Kader had lost the secret to his fundamental strength, the state he had built, the capital, education, economic system, diplomatic relations, and, most importantly, his food stores. At the same time, some tribes in Morocco were attempting to rebel against Sultan Abdulrahman's leadership and declare allegiance to Abd el-Kader. Despite Abd el-Kader's categorical refusal, Sultan Abd el-Rahman was concerned by these moves, so he too moved with a military force to pursue Emir Abd el-Kader. The force engaged in quick battles with Abd el-Kader, after which Abd el-Kader began to withdraw, realizing that this was the end of his dream and that his project for an independent Algeria, which he had begun 15 years earlier, had reached its end. And that the people themselves were tired of 15 years of battle. Here, Abd el-Kader offered France his surrender, when he corresponded with them and asked for peace in exchange for being sent to a Muslim city, be it Acre or Alexandria. In December 1847, in the Sidi Ibrahim region, Emir Abd el-Kader signed the Treaty of La Moselle, whereby he surrendered and received security from General La Moselle, promising to relocate to a Muslim city under Ottoman rule. 2 days later, Emir Abd el-Kader and his family moved to the city of Toulon in France. At that moment, the French newspaper, Molleton, celebrated this momentous event, saying that today, France could retain Algeria forever. Emir Abdelkader arrived in Toulon, and there, he and his family and close associates were placed in one of the city's prisons, waiting, as promised, for them to be relocated to an Islamic city. But the days passed, and the transfer did not happen. Offers began to come to Emir Abdelkader: leave this condition, and stay with us in France. King Philip offered him French citizenship, living in a royal palace, having his own guards, and receiving a salary from the French government. That's because they feared that he would remain in an Islamic city, and that he would organize other forces, only to return and fight them again. France wasn't willing to give him any chance, but Abdelkader still refused to reside in France. Here, his imprisonment transformed from a temporary phase into a long one. He spent it in isolation, contemplating, and writing. During his imprisonment, he wrote his most famous books, such as The Unity of God, and The Remembrance of the Wise and the Warning of the Heedless, in addition to his poetry. This situation remained until 1848, when a revolution broke out in France, and King Louis-Philippe was deposed. Then when Napoleon III announced his continued rule, he went to Emir Abdelkader and told him, "Your remaining in prison is a betrayal of the honor of France." In fact, Napoleon was so impressed by Abdelkader's character that he wrote him a beautiful letter. On October 28, 1852, Emir Abdelkader was released and arrived in Paris, to find a popular demonstration awaiting him in France. Imagine the sight. Crowds standing to see the hero, who fought their country for 15 years, to salute him. And when Abdelkader met Napoleon III, he gives him a paper with a pledge that he will not return to Algeria again. Here, Napoleon says to Abdelkader, "Abdelkader, you do not need this paper. I know who I am dealing with. I am dealing with a person whose word and promise are very important to himself." Over the course of a whole week, farewell ceremonies were held for Abdelkader in several French cities. He was saluted by the French soldiers of honor. And when Prince Abdelkader arrived in Istanbul, he found that Napoleon III had ordered him an annual salary of £4,000 sterling. The salary that Abdelkader is said to have accepted, and to spend from it on the poor and needy. After that, Abdul Qadir moves and lives in Damascus. And along the way from Istanbul to Damascus, crowds would come out to welcome him in every city he passed through. When he arrived in Damascus, he found a queue more than a mile long of locals waiting for him. They welcomed him at the city gates. The legend of Abdelkader continued in Damascus, and his religious lessons in the Umayyad Mosque were attended by thousands of people. In May 1860, when a civil war broke out between the Druze and Christians in Al-Sham, a group of Druze advanced to Damascus. Because they were trying to kill a group of unarmed Christians there, but Prince Abdelkader intervened and protected the Christians in Damascus. He hid them in his palace in the Al-Rabwa area, and also in the homes of his Algerian family. Abdelkader's efforts succeeded in saving more than 15,000 Christians from a bloody massacre. An act that the whole world will talk about and appreciate, and he will receive medals of honor from countries around the world, the Mejidiyya Medal from the Ottoman Empire, the White Cross from Russia, the Cross of the Savior from Greece, and Queen Victoria also gave him a golden rifle. Abraham Lincoln, one of the most important American presidents in history, sent him golden pistols, describing him as the great, brave Muslim leader. On May 23, 1883, at the age of 76, Prince Abdelkader passed away. But his legacy will remain immortal forever. A full 83 years after his death, and nearly 120 years after his departure from Algeria, in 1966, the remains of Emir Abdelkader were transferred from Damascus to Algeria in a grand ceremony for burial in the Alia Cemetery in Algeria. Finally, the country he fought for independence was regaining it decades after his death. Despite all these years, his memory is still present, not only in his country, but also in the country he fought, France. To the point that in 2022, a French city decided to build a memorial for him. In commemoration of his heroism, courage, nobility, and rare humanity.